Whispers from the dust of ancient Iraq. Dark legends, thousands of years old, that speak of forbidden rites and shadowy figures. They tell of the priests of Babylon, powerful, secret-keeping men who served gods of immense and terrible power. And at the center of the darkest of these whispers is a horrifying claim, tales of shocking, secret acts performed in the dead of night on the young, the pure, the virgin. It's a terrifying image. A story of ritual abuse, depravity, and power, all hidden behind the walls of the ziggurat. It's the story that has defined Babylon for millennia as the ultimate city of sin. Did the high priests of Marduk, the astronomers and mathematicians who mapped the stars, really commit these atrocities? Or is this one of history's most successful, and most disturbing, smear campaigns? Today, we are lighting a torch and walking into the shadows of the past. We will separate the hard facts of cuneiform tablets from the sensationalist fiction. We are going to uncover what really happened inside Babylon's forbidden temples. And I promise you the truth is far stranger, more complex, and in one specific case, more horrifying than any myth. First, let's address the elephant in the room, the specific claim of horrifying acts on male virgins. Let's be crystal clear, in the hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets we've recovered, from legal codes to religious texts, there is zero evidence of this specific practice. It simply isn't there. So, where did this story come from? It comes from a historical libel campaign, a character assassination of an entire empire. This was propaganda, written by Babylon's enemies. The most famous example, of course, is the Old Testament. For the Hebrew captives, Babylon was the oppressor, the city of their exile. In the book of Revelation, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, becomes the ultimate symbol of sin, depravity, and persecution. Later, Greek and Roman historians, like Herodotus, visited the ruins and heard third-hand rumors, which they often misinterpreted or exaggerated. They were already biased against this barbarian Eastern Empire. These sensational stories were then picked up by Victorian-era archaeologists and authors, who, with their own repressed sensibilities, let their imaginations run wild. Over 2,000 years, the real Babylon was buried, and a fictional one, a dark theme park of sin, was built on top of it. The idea of horrifying acts on virgins is the final, modern flourish on this ancient slander. So, if they weren't the cultists of fiction, who were these priests? The reality is that they were the intellectual and bureaucratic elite of the empire. They weren't a monolith, there were many different classes of priests. There was the Sangha, or temple administrator, who was essentially a high-powered CEO. Temples were not just places of worship, they were the largest economic engines in the empire. They owned vast swaths of land, ran massive workshops, and even acted as banks, lending out silver at interest. The Sangha managed all of it. Then there were the scholars. The Ipu, or exorcist, was a highly trained specialist. If you were sick, you might go to one, who would diagnose which sin you committed to anger a god or which demon had possessed you. They would then perform complex rituals, like the Makal or burning ceremony, where they would create effigies of the demons in tallow or dough and ritually destroy them in fire, using incantations to purge the patient. These weren't wild-eyed fanatics, they were more like the doctors and therapists of their day, using a combination of psychology, magic, and ritual. The primary, day-to-day job of a priest was something far less sensational, it was housekeeping. To the Babylonians, the carved statues of their gods, like the grand statue of Marduk in the capital, were not representations of the god. They were the literal, physical, living bodies of the god on earth. The god inhabited the statue. And just like a living king, that god had needs. Every single day, the priests would perform the MSP, or washing of the mouth, ritual. They would wake the god in the morning, bathe the statue in sacred water, clothe it in fabulously expensive robes, and set out 2 full meals for it a day: bread, beer, meat, fruit, and honey, all served on golden platters. The god would spiritually consume the meal, and then the food would be taken away and distributed to the king and the temple staff. This was the reversion of the offering. The great secret of the temple wasn't horrifying rituals, it was that the priests were the best-fed people in the city. This is the biggest misconception of all. You've probably heard the story, which comes directly from the Greek historian Herodotus. He claimed that every single Babylonian woman, once in her life, was forced to go to the temple of the goddess Ishtar, sit, and wait until a stranger threw a silver coin in her lap. She would then have to have sex with him, with the money being donated to the temple. This story has defined our view of Babylonian religion for centuries. But modern scholars, like Dr. Stephanie Boudin, have compellingly argued that this entire concept of sacred prostitution is a total myth. A 2,000-year-old misunderstanding. Herodotus likely misunderstood what he was seeing. He may have seen women making dedications to the temple, or a pre-marriage ritual, and, coming from a very different Greek culture, interpreted it through a lens of sensationalism. There are no Babylonian texts that support his claim. What we do have are texts describing various classes of women devoted to the temple. Some were Nad too, women from elite families who lived in a special cloister, remained celibate, and acted as scribes and businesswomen. The truth of women in the temple was one of economic power and ritual devotion, which was twisted by outsiders into a lurid tale of required prostitution. But, you might say, what about the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage? This was a real ritual, but it has also been wildly misunderstood. This ancient Sumerian and Babylonian rite was performed to ensure the fertility of the land. In the very early Sumerian period, thousands of years before the Babylon we're talking about, it's believed the king would ritually, and perhaps literally, couple with a high priestess, who represented the goddess of love and fertility, Inanna, or Ishtar. However, by the time of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, this ritual had evolved. It was a deeply symbolic act. The king would enter the inner sanctum and marry the goddess, but this was now a union between the human king and the divine statue. It was a political and religious ceremony to confirm the king's right to rule and to ask the goddess to bless the land with abundance. It was not a public orgy or a ritual for virgins, it was the most important, symbolic, and political act of the king's reign. Now we get to the facts that are genuinely strange, and to our modern eyes, quite gruesome. If a Babylonian king wanted to know the future, should I go to war? Will the harvest be good? He wouldn't ask a prophet. He'd call for a BR, the diviner. The BR priest specialized in a practice called extispacy, divination by examining the entrails of a sacrificed animal. This was a highly complex and costly ritual. A pure, unblemished sheep would be ritually sacrificed. The BR would then remove its liver. To the Babylonians, the liver was the seat of thought and emotion, and they believed the gods wrote their messages, their omens, directly onto the liver of the sacrificed animal. The priest would read the liver like a cuneiform tablet. Every mark, every pock, every variation in shape or color had a specific meaning. This spot means the enemy's army will falter. This line means the king will have a long life. We have even found detailed clay models of sheep livers, used as textbooks to train new diviners, with all the different zones and their meanings labeled. Forget fiction, this was the real, bloody, and dark science of the Babylonian temple. The strangest public ritual of all was the Akitu, the 12-day New Year's festival. This was the most important holiday in Babylon. The whole city celebrated. The priests would recite the En Eli, the epic of creation, telling how their chief god, Marduk, defeated the dragon of chaos, Tiamat. But the most bizarre event happened on the 5th day. The king of Babylon, the most powerful man on earth, would be brought into the inner sanctum of the temple before the statue of Marduk. The high priest would walk up to him, and slap him in the face. This wasn't a symbolic tap. The texts say the priest was supposed to strike him hard enough to make him cry. The priest would then strip the king of his royal regalia, his scepter, his ring, his crown, and force him to kneel. The king would then deliver a negative confession, swearing to Marduk that he had not sinned, had not neglected the gods, and had not oppressed his people. The priest would then slap him again. Why? It was a ritual of humility. It was to prove to the god Marduk that the king was his humble servant, not an arrogant tyrant. If the king shed tears, it was seen as a good omen, a sign that Marduk was pleased and would renew the king's mandate to rule for another year. But of all the rituals, one truly was horrifying. It was rare, desperate, and involved human sacrifice. It was the Arp-Hai, or substitute king ritual. Babylonian priests were obsessed with astronomy. They believed that what happened in the heavens directly predicted events on earth. An eclipse, especially a lunar eclipse, was the most terrifying omen of all. It was a divine message that the king was doomed to die. But the priests had a way to cheat fate. They would find a substitute king. This person was often a condemned criminal, a prisoner of war, or sometimes a gardener, a euphemism for a commoner who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. This substitute was dressed in the king's robes, placed on the throne, and given the trappings of power. He was called my lord and was allowed to rule, sometimes for up to 100 days, to soak up the evil destiny meant for the real king. Meanwhile, the real king would go into hiding, referred to only as the farmer. When the fated period was over, or when the eclipse's danger had passed, the ritual had to be completed. The substitute king was seized, and, to fulfill the prophecy, he was executed. The evil omen was fulfilled, the gods were satisfied, and the real king would emerge from hiding, purified, to reclaim his throne. This is the one, documented, horrifying ritual from Babylon. It wasn't about sex or random virgins, it was a cold, calculated, political act of human sacrifice to save the state. So, what have we found? We found that the dark myth of priests and virgins is just that, a myth. A piece of ancient propaganda and modern fantasy. The real Babylonian priest was a scientist, a politician, an exorcist, and a bureaucrat. Their religion was not built on sensational depravity, but on a desperate, all-consuming quest for order. They studied livers and stars to find order in a chaotic future. They held the Akita festival to restore order to the cosmos. They fed the god statues to maintain the order between heaven and earth. Their concept of purity was ritual, not sexual. Priests had to be celibate to be pure enough for the gods. Sacrificial animals had to be unblemished. It was this very concept of purity that was later perverted by their enemies, twisted from ritual cleanliness into a dark obsession with sexual purity and its sacrifice. The true story of Babylon is not about its depravity, but about its profound, complex, and sometimes ruthless quest for knowledge and control, and how that quest was slandered by history. So, what do you think is the most misunderstood part of ancient history? And which real ancient ritual do you find the most bizarre? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed digging up the truth and separating fact from fiction, do us a favor and hit that like button. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell for more deep dives into history's greatest myths and mysteries. And if you know someone who still thinks of Babylon as just a city of sin, share this video and show them the truth. Thanks for watching.